in higher learning, with many college students scrambling to find the money they need to complete their education, a new proposal suggests increasing the amount of federal money students can borrow. While federal loans carry many benefits for students, there are some who are concerned that pushing young people to borrow more money is a bad idea. Here to talk about it is Peter Kerwin from the Rhode Island Higher Education Assistance Authority. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning.
So, why shouldn't we allow students to borrow more money?
Well, look, the short answer is that even if it's the federal government doing the lending, it's still a loan. You have to borrow, you have to pay the money back at some point in most circumstances, and that's the real issue here. There was a story, kind of a paper put out recently by an assistant professor at the University of California, Irvine, and a former writer for the New York Times, a guy named Jonathan Glader. And the title of this paper was "The Other Big Test: Why Congress Should Allow College Students to Borrow More Through Federal Aid Programs." And the argument he was making was that since those federal loans have the most generous terms, repayment provisions, let students borrow more of that kind of money because it's going to be more beneficial to them. Now, obviously, we've talked about that. I'm a big proponent of, federal loans are better than private loans, obviously, because they do have those generous forgiveness provisions, forbearance, that just don't come with private loans. So, and right here, we're always telling people max out on those federal loans if you can.
Right.
But the flip side to all of this is the notion that if you do that, you're going to be encouraging students in some cases to borrow more than they necessarily have to. And there's a guy named Zach Bissonnette. He's a writer for the Moneyland blog that Time magazine has. He also wrote a book. My wife read it. It's called Debt-Free You. You as in university.
Okay.
My wife said, you got to read this. We've got a 14-year-old daughter. You got to read this book. And basically his whole take is, don't borrow any money to go to college. I mean, he's from a totally different approach. He's saying you shouldn't borrow at all.
I feel like that can be tough. School is very expensive. Is that realistic for students to slack off on borrowing? And
well, the case he makes, and it's a pretty compelling case, is that if you're going to have a dream school that's going to require you to get into so much debt that graduation, those years after graduation, are going to be just all about paying back, paying back. Forget about that dream school. Go to a state school. You'll get just as good an education, and you're going to be taking less debt to make it happen. And that's a really, that's an interesting argument. And I think there is a lot to be said for being realistic about what you can afford. Because too many times we see kids taking on this mountain of debt, and then when they get out of school, they're not able to take the job they want because it won't allow them to pay back the loans in a timely way.
Right.
And what Bissonnette's big argument is that if you're paying off debt right after school, those are years you're missing to be paying towards your retirement, which you really need to start thinking about.
So you got to start weighing the pros and cons. Peter,
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us this
No
morning.
problem.
And for more information on federal student loans, head to foxprovidence.com.